Hi, my name is Sandy Solaka, and this video is basically designed to represent assignment 3 for Compy 560. So to begin with, I'm going to log into my account. The password. Do the same thing for Volta. I don't have to save it. So we basically logged into Volta Jason. So the whole idea is we're going to be sending strings from Volta to Jason and from Jason to Volta. And to do that, let's go ahead and start by showing the code that I wrote. We're typing nano. So Jason will be the server, and on the other side, Volta will be the client. Client. Let's see. And then we can see both codes are saved into the server. So to start with, on the left side, we know the server. So this is the whole code. And if we start from the top, we can see that we got a bunch of libraries that I needed to run the code in C. So we have the main function here, and it has two arguments. One is the size of array that we need to pass in for the port number. And first, we're basically checking if the argument is greater than 0, then return this message, which is too many arguments supplied. Else, if argument equals 2, then we're going to create the port number and the socket created, and it's going to give us socket ID, which is basically 3. And then keep down here, you can see the same thing. Then we're checking for the size of the port, and if it's valuable, we can just use it and then keep going. And right here, we're displaying the message if listen equals 1. If not, then fail to listen. And we're going to close the socket or return -1 as a false statement. Doing the same here, same thing down here. Let's say if we got the connection is successfully made, we're going to see this message right here saying that the connection with the client has made successfully. When we use the same port number for both, along with the IP address. If you come down here, we can see that we have a do while, which is basically going to keep the code running every single time without stopping, unless we decide to stop it by typing E, which is an exit to the code. This whole thing is going to keep doing and checking, sending and receiving, sending and receiving until we terminate the code. Bunch of for loops, if else statements. I have a condition here to check if we received or failed to receive any string from the client. If you look down here, you can see that we should be able to close the client and the server at the same time. So basically, if we're not able to close the client or the socket, we should be seeing this message right here. We're gonna test all of these to see if we're getting the same results. If we're passing too few arguments, then this message will pop out saying, hey, the arguments are not sufficient, try a different number or strings. On the other side, if you look at the client code, we see it basically almost the same code as the server because we're using the same logic apparently. Here we have a main function that has two arguments. One is an array pointer, and then this right here keeps checking for the arguments greater than 3. Then it's going to display this message, and it keeps going, checking this, creating a socket number, and then adding port so we can verify that we got the same connection. If we got an error, then this should pop out saying, hey, we got an error, try a different number or different name. And if not, we're going to close it, return -1. So if you look down here, we have the do while, which is basically it's going to keep the code running until you terminate it. But first, it starts by checking. If you enter the exit, which is basically just an letter E, instead of continuing, we can just exit right away instead of going into the whole thing and then come back to exit. Gonna keep checking, fail to closing the send, and then keep doing the same thing, break, and then keeps over and checking until we get the right results. Right here we can see that we receive strings, but while using 1, which is while true, it's gonna keep doing this until it shuts down by typing the letter E. This is basically it. So let's go ahead and run the code to see if it works. So let's do gcc/o server.c. Code's running. Server. Let's see. Too few arguments. Not supplied. This is why we need to add the IP address by typing IP route. Now you can see that this is the IP address that we need to pass in every time we use the client sites. So let's try to save this and then go back to it. Let's run it and see if we can. Let's use the port number instead. We can actually use port number 5000 all the way to 5039, whichever. I'm doing this. See if it works. Yeah, it's working correctly. And it shows that we have a socket ID, which is 3. Right now, when you go on the other side, and then we gotta type in, let's gcc client, this creating executable file. Let's see. You can see it's running right now. Let's try to run it and see. But in this case, we're gonna have to type in the IP address so we can make the connection successfully, which is 166.3. Let's double check, along with passing the port number, which is 5005 in this case. So right now the connection has made successfully. You can actually see that same IP address is connecting to the same server. So if you start sending, you can actually see this message right here, which allows us to send a string. Like if I type in my name based on the assignment and try to send it as an example, you can actually see that we received it here backwards, and it was sent back to here again, so we can actually see it displaying on the client end as well. Let's try a different number or like a different name. Let's do 70. Volta. Student ID sent, and we can see it's reversed all the way. So if I want to exit, I'm going to type in E and then exit. We can actually see the client is done sending message, shutting down. The whole system going to be shutting down right now because I already exited the whole connection. All right, let's go back to the questions that are required in this assignment. So first, what are the sockets and on which layer do they operate? So basically they are a process between the programs running in the network. In other words, the process between the transport layer and the application layer. This is question number 1. And now question number 2. It says differentiate between TCP and UDP. This assignment is based on TCP or UDP. YouTube uses TCP or UDP. And the answer is UDP is less dependable than TCP in a way, whereas sending data UDP is quicker than TCP. TCP checks for problems and reports them, whereas UDP only checks for errors but does not report. TCP guarantees that the order of data is the same at both the sending and receiving ends, whereas UDP does not. So as we can see, this assignment depends on TCP, and also YouTube uses both TCP and UDP in their servers. All right, question number 3. What will happen if I use an out of range port number in my code? Will I encounter an error? If yes, then why? And if no, then why? So the answer is yes. We'll encounter an exception error due to an incorrect port number, which is it's not a big deal. It's just easy to fix. Not quite an error because we have an exception that can deal with the problem. The last question is, what is the maximum number of sockets that a client and a server can have, which is basically to the power of 16 minus 1, which equals to 65,535. So this is it. This is the end. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.